When we think of Bhishma, we usually think of this incredible, self-sacrificing figure, right? The great protector of the Kuru dynasty. But that's really only half the story. Today, we're going to look at the other side, the controversial choices, the deafening silences, that, for all his greatness, actually helped pave the road to the Mahabharata war.
And this is the question I really want you to hold in your mind as we go through this. When your own personal promise clashes with what's right, with what's just, what do you do? Bhishma's entire life is a tragic exploration of this very problem, where the lines between duty and honor just get so blurry.
So, where does it all start to go wrong? Well, the first domino to fall is the heartbreaking story of Princess Amba. This is really our first glimpse of how Bhishma's rigid vow could lead to absolute catastrophe for a completely innocent person.
I mean, just look at this chain of events. It's a disaster, step by step. First, Bhishma just takes her from her own Swayamvar, a pure power move. When she tells him she's in love with someone else, he just lets her go. Problem solved, right? Wrong. The damage was done. Her beloved, King Shalva, won't take her back. Why? Because in his eyes, she's now another man's prize. So, humiliated, with her life in ruins, she goes back to Bhishma and says, "You did this. You have to marry me." But he won't budge. And this is his reason. This is the justification that completely seals her fate. He literally prioritizes a promise he made to himself over the life he just shattered. He kidnapped her, destroyed her future, and then just washed his hands of it, all because of his vow. You really have to ask, was this about honor, or was it just about stubborn pride?
So, what do you think? Was he upholding Dharma by sticking to his guns, or was this a terrible, terrible injustice? Because by choosing his personal vow over his responsibility to her, he didn't just ruin her life. He lit a long, slow-burning fuse of revenge that would one day come back for him. Okay, so that was a personal failure, but Bhishma's inaction had huge political fallout too. His silence on the massive issue of who should be king allowed the seeds of war to be planted right there in the palace.
Look, it should have been simple. After King Pandu died, his son Yudhishthira was the obvious choice for king. He was righteous, respected, the perfect heir. But Bhishma, the one man with the authority to make it happen, did nothing. He just stood by while the blind king, Dhritarashtra, stayed on as regent, knowing full well that Dhritarashtra's one great weakness was his toxic love for his arrogant son, Duryodhana. This inaction created a power vacuum, and in that void, Duryodhana's poison started to spread everywhere, completely unchecked. And all of this, the personal tragedy, the political inaction, it all builds to this one moment, the single most horrific event in the entire epic, the absolute point of no return for the Kuru dynasty, the public humiliation of Draupadi. I want you to just picture the scene. The court is packed. All the elders, the gurus, the king, and Bhishma, they're all there. And in front of every single one of them, the queen of the family, their own daughter-in-law, is dragged by her hair to be publicly shamed. This wasn't just an attack on a woman. This was Dharma itself, being put on trial for everyone to see. And in that moment of absolute desperation, who does she look to? She looks right at Bhishma, the grandfather, the one man who is supposed to be the guardian of their honor, and she asks him this simple, gut-wrenching question, is this right? Is this Dharma? And his answer? His answer is just unbelievable. It's shocking. He doesn't talk about justice. He doesn't talk about what's right. He basically says, I'm on his payroll, so I have to keep my mouth shut. I eat his salt. In that moment, he makes it crystal clear. His loyalty is to the throne, not to righteousness. And that is the moment the legend of Bhishma truly crumbles. And that's the tragedy of it all. This wasn't some isolated incident. It was a pattern. You see it over and over. He abandoned Amba because of his vow. He stayed silent about who should be king. He just sat there and watched as the Pandavas were cheated in the dice game. He did nothing to stop Duryodhana's plot to burn them all alive. His silence was a constant, deafening presence. So you end up with these two completely opposite versions of Bhishma. On the one hand, you have the legend, the warrior of Dharma, the man of his word, the great protector. But on the other hand, you have the accomplice, the silent spectator to evil, the man who chose loyalty to a person over loyalty to justice, and who ultimately failed to protect the very family he'd sworn his life to. So where does a path of silence and misplaced loyalty lead? Well, it can only lead to one place, the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And it's here that Bhishma has to pay the ultimate price, forced to fight for the very injustice he allowed to fester. For 10 days, for 10 whole days, this great pillar of Dharma served as the supreme commander for the forces of Adharma, the side of unrighteousness. He fought against the Pandavas, the very people he loved and knew were in the right, all for the sake of loyalty to a corrupt throne. The irony is just staggering.
It's only at the very end, in his final moments, that Bhishma finally seems to understand the true weight of his mistakes. His whole life of internal conflict boils down to one moment of tragic, perfect clarity.
Can you imagine a more tragic scene? He's literally lying on a bed of arrows, put there by his own grandson, Arjun, and it's only then, with his family destroyed and his kingdom in ruins, that he finally finds his voice to preach about Dharma, the very lesson he never quite managed to live by himself.
And what wisdom does he share? He tells Yudhishthira that Dharma is supreme, that your first duty is always to what is right, not to a person, not to a throne. It is the perfect lesson, a lesson he learned far, far too late.
So this is the question we're left with. Was Bhishma a great man who was just a victim of his own circumstances? Or was he a flawed hero whose stubborn principles actually helped cause the war that destroyed everything he loved? There's really no easy answer, is there?
Now, Bhishma's story is a tragic and powerful lesson, but as critical as his failures were, they weren't the only spark that lit the flame of war. The seeds of jealousy that consumed the Kauravas, well, that fire wasn't really lit by politics or succession. It was lit at a swayamvar, a wedding ceremony.
Next time, we're diving straight into the swayamvar of Draupadi. We're going to see how one completely unprecedented marriage, one wife for 5 brothers, became the event that truly ignited the Kauravas' hatred and sealed the fate of an entire kingdom. It's a story of love, destiny, and jealousy you won't want to miss. See you then.